everyone. So now that you've taken a look at the intensive interventions for students struggling in reading and math, and you focused your attention in this on the parts that were related to reading, and you also went back and reread and browsed through chapter 1 of our textbook, which talked about systematic explicit reading instruction, and then the whole RTI model, which we also looked at in the previous module. I'd like to talk a little bit about intervention instructional planning and ILO writing for this class and what it looks like specifically in 520. So first, to just review really who receives this kind of teaching, typically it's students who did not respond to instruction within the first and second tiers of support that are in an RTI program. These are sometimes students with disabilities who are not making progress toward their IEP goals, or students who require that one-on-one assessment and instruction to diagnose very specific literacy needs. This is typically about 5% of all students in a classroom. So in 520, this is where we kind of veer off of the RTI path, because most of the focus students that you were paired with, we intentionally asked you to be paired with, are not your tier 3 students. They are tier 1 students who might be on that edge of maybe needing a little bit of extra support. So the teaching that you would plan in this class and implement with your focus student is really sort of a tier 3 kind of intervention level, and it's just to give you an opportunity for what it would be like if you were an intensivist or a special education teacher who is focused on this kind of teaching, as you all are receiving inclusive certificates. But just know that this kind of teaching is really designed for students who are being considered for tier 3. So how is this intervention level instruction actually designed? It is typically designed using something called a data-based individualization structure. That's just a fancy way of saying a systematic method that uses assessment data to figure out the literacy areas of need that a student needs more intense support in. You start with diagnostic assessments. You write some really targeted learning objectives. You provide targeted instruction, and then you post-assess. This bullet right here in a nutshell is 520. This is what you did in this class. You gave diagnostic assessments, whether or not you realized that's what you were doing with your assessments. You were going in and looking around and seeing what you could diagnose and see. Now, of course, we're not talking about clinically diagnostic assessments. You were really just looking at a student's reading ability. And then for the very end of the literacy assessment project, you'll be working on writing a learning objective that you would have then provided targeted instruction to your student and then post-assessed. So you'll get as far as here in this class this semester, and this is unfortunately what we will not be able to complete. But I'm still going to walk you through that process so that you know how to do it. So when does this happen? First, you have to determine in the real world, not in 520, that a core comprehensive reading program has been used in the gen ed classroom. So first, the student has to go through tier 1 instruction. Then a research-based intervention program has to have been used by the classroom teacher in that CCRP, and that's a sign that tier 2 has been met. So when I talked about this in the previous module video, this is that tier 2 pull-out small group embedded in still the teacher's daily reading instruction. That has to happen. And then if the student still has literacy needs that are not being met within tier 1 and tier 2, this intervention style instruction takes place. So this is an image that shows kind of the flow of this. You start with that validated intervention program. You monitor their progress. Are they responsive? Then you keep monitoring. Are they not responsive? Then you go on to more diagnostic assessments. You intervene with some sort of instruction. You monitor their progress, and you keep going in a cyclical manner. So this part down here that I'm focusing on, diagnostic assessment, intervention or adaptation, progress monitoring. This is a teacher's everyday life. This is what teaching is. You look for your students' needs, you teach to those needs, and you progress monitor. And then if they need that extra support up here of a validated program, that's where you come in with your secondary intervention. So we are operating down here this semester. You're diagnosing with assessments, and then you're coming up with interventions that you're going to give. So what are some features of this instruction? It's tied directly to the student's needs, which are derived from your assessment results. So in this class, the teaching that you're planning and you're still going to write about in your LAP Part 2 is not based on grade level. In fact, I'm not even going to ask you to look at the Next Gen ELA standards. This is like the part that blows people's minds about this class. I want you to look at the skills of literacy and the abilities of your student. And yes, I'm still asking you to contextualize that to a grade level, but the goals that you create for them are instructional goals based on their specific abilities. So your instruction is very domain specific, meaning that it can be focused on one very specific area of need within the broader tier 1 or tier 2 instruction that they're receiving. So for example, you might be looking very specifically of accuracy in reading fluently or in writing expository texts, but it wouldn't be that broad general grade level expectation. Individualized instruction is continuing until progress is made and is shown in the progress monitoring. So progress monitoring, we haven't really talked about it too much in this class. That is that frequent check-in with your students through assessments that you will keep giving. They're usually mini versions looking at the skills in the broader category that you're assessing. So if you have identified comprehension as an area in need of support for your student, your initial data was probably like a DRA rubric or a failed quiz at the end of a reading A to Z assessment passage that you gave, or a Fountas and Pinnell interview that the student scored poorly on. That's probably your initial data. And then you would teach that student a series of lessons that are targeted in that comprehension area. And then to progress monitor, you might stop sometimes at the end of every lesson and just give a quick little check-in assessment, and that could be another short little like 2-question quiz or an exit ticket, or even just a retell what you learned. You might give a graphic organizer that you collect and score and track their progress, but somehow after every session or after every couple sessions, you would check in with your student to monitor their progress. And you use that information to understand when it's time to back off your supports and your scaffolds and allow them to gradually release that responsibility out to them and allow them to become more independent. And eventually, as you're progress monitoring, you'll start to realize that your focus student hopefully has mastered that strategy that you've taught, and then you know it's time to post-assess. So in your literacy assessment project paper, you're also going to be asked to talk about the progress monitoring that you have planned for your student. This can be a very brief, at the end of every session, I will check in with an exit ticket and I will monitor their progress toward mastering that strategy that I've taught. So to plan intervention level instruction, first and foremost, you start by talking with the classroom teacher. You've all done this because you've all gotten your focus student and given your assessments. Then you'll go over any goals that the teacher has or goals that you have based on what's already happened, and this should include any IEP goals. So be aware of any IEP or 504 plan goals. You'll confer with the teacher to learn about any quantitative, and when we say quantitative, what has the teacher done about things like the size of the group, the time that the teacher has spent, the number of prompts provided, any sort of numeric kinds of things that the teacher has done, or qualitative changes like strategies, practice, environment, immediate corrective feedback. So for step 3, you're asking the teacher about what things he or she has done quantitatively and qualitatively to meet the student's needs already. Then you're going to analyze existing data for the student, including classroom assessments, state test results, any formal assessment data that has been given to the student, and use that to start to determine your areas for more assessments. So assume that all of this has happened behind the scenes or prior to your meeting with the focus student this semester. Here's where you all came in. Step 5 is to administer diagnostic level assessments, including affective assessments like the focus student inventory that you created, reading and writing assessments, some of which you gave this semester, and then anything else based on any other areas of need. And that would be your digging deeper that you noticed. Then you analyze your data and you write specific needs-based ILOs. So we are at step 6 in this cycle for this semester. So how do we write intended learning outcomes, ILOs? First and foremost, you have to determine the most immediate needs of the student. And for some of you, you have lots of student needs that you've noticed. So you might have to list them and actually prioritize. And that's why I like this language here that says the most immediate need. So think about what is primary. So if your student shows a lot of needs and they have comprehension as a need, and they have decoding as a need, and they have fluency like prosody as a need, the most immediate need in that list of 3 would be, if we were in class, I'd be asking, decoding. It all kind of boils down to decoding in this class. But a student who struggles to decode will also, research has shown, struggle in their prosody, their expression, and also in their comprehension. So when you think of the most immediate need, in your mind, you should think of the most basic need that the student has. And lots of needs that show themselves in literacy assessments boil down to a lack of ability to decode text. If the student cannot decode what they're reading, that will impact everything else, which is why most people in this class end up doing decoding as their most immediate need, in which they teach their lesson about. That being said, you can decide how you'd like to structure your 3 growth areas in this class, but typically we're going to be seeing decoding as one of them, at least one of them. Then you take a deeper dive into your assessment data. You try to pinpoint exactly where that student's ability lies. So where is that breakdown in mastery of the skill? So if it's decoding that you see as the issue, decoding what? Do they struggle with the initial sound? With the final sound? Is it medial vowels that they're struggling with? Is it inflected word endings? Are they struggling with digraphs or trigraphs like ch and st in the word string? Are they struggling with other word parts? So take a really close look at your data to try to pinpoint exactly where your students' abilities lie. And that's what you've been doing in your data analysis for this class. So that's where you're going to head as you think about your ILO. Then you're going to write a goal for the student based on the data that you have. Make sure that your goal is realistic, it's measurable, and it directly relates to the most immediate need that you identified. So if decoding is your goal, decoding is coming across a word and using a strategy to figure out that word as you're reading, your ILO should not be related to writing. Now, that doesn't mean that your writing vocabulary data can't inform your ILO in reading, but your ILO must be tied to that most immediate need. And it does not need to be tied to grade level expectations. These are individualized and come from the needs of your students, not from the learning standards. So to write an ILO, there's a very structured, clear format that I'm going to teach you, and I'd like you to use this for your ILO that you end up with. In this class, you only have to write one ILO for one of your focus areas that you're going to work on, the most immediate growth area. So A clear learning objective starts with a statement of the conditions under which the performance is expected to occur. So this is super easy for all of you. It's going to be either after one-on-one instruction or at the end of this intervention. Those are the only options. It's going to be one of those two. If you were teaching out in the real world in a non-intervention setting, this could have a range of, you could have, your learning objective could have a range of beginnings, like given a quiz with 5 questions, or given a graphic organizer, or after participating in a read aloud. So this could look different, but in this class, you have 2 options: after instruction, at the end of the intervention. So step 1 is pretty easy. Step 2 of the ILO is communicating exactly what behavior you're expecting to see as a result of your instruction. This is the student's performance, and this gets tied directly to your pre-test assessment data. So at the end of intervention, the student will be able to read a text fluently, is one example, and this would have been tied directly to them reading fluently in the pre-assessment. They were unable to do that, and so that's the behavior I'm looking for again. Or the student will be able to comprehend a level N passage. So previously in pre-assessment, they were unable to comprehend that level N passage, so that's where it appears in my ILO. So connect that starting phrase at the end of intervention with the action verb that communicates the behavior of the learner. And you should select actions that can be observed and measured by your post-assessment. So you can see here, read a text fluently and comprehend. Those are my big ideas in literacy, those big skills, the broad skills that I'm looking for. I want my student to become fluent. I want my student to comprehend. So those are 2 examples. In the behavior, I should see the verb for the thing you want them to do. Other options could be, we'll be able to decode a text. We'll be able to spell accurately. Some of you focused on spelling in your digging deeper. Student will be able to read a word list. Some of you are using the Ohio word test. That is also appropriate. Those are the kinds of verbs, those big ideas in reading are the verbs that you should be focusing on. In step 3, the last part, is the criterion or the standard of performance that is going to be considered mastering the ILO that you've developed. So this should be directly tied to your post-assessment tool. And please do not expect perfection. You should not even expect, for some of you, that your student can perform on grade level. By the end of a quick 3-lesson intervention, your students will not make huge drastic gains or improvements. They will improve. They have in the last 4 semesters of teaching this class. The focus students always do improve, but very small amounts. So the last part of your standard is stating that measurable criterion, measurable by your post-assessment, at which you're going to consider their work acceptable. So be realistic about what a kiddo could actually get done in a couple of lessons with you. So it might sound like this: to earn a 3 out of 4, I would say on all categories of the NAEP oral reading fluency scale. That's not all categories. To earn a 3 out of 4 on NAEP's oral reading fluency, I mixed it up with the DRA. Or to make measurable growth on, here's where I would add, on all categories of the DRA rubric, or you can be even more specific on the details categories of the DRA rubric. You can decide the level of specificity. So here are some sample ILOs to help you think about your ILO that you might write. So the first one, after instruction, the student will be able to read a text fluently enough to earn a 3 out of 4 on the NAEP oral reading fluency scale. That came from the previous 3 slides, as did this one. After instruction, the student will be able to comprehend a level N text to make measurable improvement on the DRA rubric. So you can see, and another good important thing to point out is that the way that you pre-assessed has to match your post-assessment. Remember, we're comparing apples to apples in this class. So if you pre-assessed with the DRA, or you pre-assessed with the really great reading diagnostic decoding assessment, or you pre-assessed with the Words Their Way spelling inventory, or you pre-assessed with the NAEP oral reading fluency scale, that needs to be the assessment that you're using to measure the student's success at the end. So this person would have assessed for comprehension using a level N text. Even the text level needs to stay the same, using the DRA rubric. The next one, after instruction, the student will be able to decode vowel consonant E words. Those are words like ride, R-I-D-E, in a word list with at least 95% accuracy. So this one would have been somebody gave a word list, like the Ohio word list, and yes, you can be that specific. You can say in the Ohio word list, and the student previously would have scored maybe a 90% or an 85% on that with the CVC words. So one way that you could do this is to count up all of the VCE words on that list, and if there's 4, you might say if they missed all 4 of them, maybe on the post assessment you're looking for 50% of them. So that would be 2 out of 4. So you can play with the amounts and the calibrations for how you want their measurable improvement to be shown. And this is another way to sort of couch how they grow. If you're having a hard time thinking about, do I want 95%? How do I figure out the percentage? How do I figure out the level I want them to go at? You can simply say that they will make measurable improvements. And what that means, if you can measure that they've improved, then they met the ILO. You're all welcome to use to make measurable improvement in whatever area you'd like. But a more specific ILO is good to write too. So this student maybe scored at a 75 or an 80% accuracy, and then in post-assessment you're looking for 95. Don't expect perfection. Another one, after instruction, the student will be able to correctly identify. So I'm thinking this will be something they had to identify, like the letter ID. At least 52 letters on the observation survey letter identification subtest. And I was right. So for this one, let's say they got 45 or they got even 50. And so your expectation is now they're going to get 52. The next one, after instruction, the student will be able to read a level J text. So now I know that I'm looking at something related to their running record and that reading with at least 95% accuracy. So for that one, I'm targeting their fluency accuracy. So the reading skill would be fluency, and I would know that previously maybe they read a level J text at a 90. So I'm looking for them to go from instructional at a level J up to independent at a level J. And that's the way that you can write that. You could also say student will be able to read a level J text independently. That's another way to write this, because we all know that 95% would be independent according to Clay. So there's lots of wiggle room in how you write these. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should align to your assessment and be some way that you can measure their improvement or their work. Last one, after instruction, the student will be able to read a level G text. So they would have previously read a level G text with a self-correction ratio of at least 1 to 3. So previously, remember, a lower number is good on self-correct. So previously maybe their rate was 1 in 7 or 1 in 9, and now I'm expecting them to correct 1 out of every 3 errors that they make. So I've taught them a self-correct strategy. We focused on level G. I'm going to give them a new level G, and this time I expect to see self-correcting of at least 1 in 3. So those are some sample ILOs, and also thinking about how pre-assessment data were used and how the big strategy that or the big skill that you're focused on is found in each of your ILOs. And so I want you to now practice. And the way that I'd like you to practice, because we're not in class, is to create a Google Doc. So take this practice ILO writing. This is embedded into the Moodle book, but you can also find it here. And this sheet that I've created has 3 sets of practice ILOs. At this time, I just want you to do the ILO. I'm going to make another video that walks through the action research question here with the strategy. We haven't talked about strategic instruction yet. So just do the practice ILO. And how it works is I'm going to give you the pre-assessment data for Johnny, Jenny, and Roberto. And I want you to use that pre-assessment data to think about and write an ILO for that student. So Johnny is a first grader who scored in the 3rd Stanine of the Ohio word test for word reading, and he missed all 4 of the CVC words on that list. So what could you do for Johnny in terms of an ILO? So it starts with after instruction, the student, or after intervention, whatever you want to say, the student will be able to do what? It should connect back to the same skill, reading words, and it should connect and be aligned to the pre-assessment data. So previously he missed all 4 CVC words. So student will be able to read CVC words to what extent? And I'll let you finish writing that ILO. So if he missed all 4, you're not going to expect all 4 as perfection for the post-assessment after you teach him, but what seems reasonable? 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4, that's your decision, and just remember that this is a first grader who struggles with this. Okay, the second one, Jenny, is a 3rd grader who read a level K text at an instructional level but could not give a detailed summary of the text afterward. So she scored in 2 out of 4 in all categories of the DRA rubric. So you can clearly see this student is reading a lower level text for a 3rd grader and is not giving a good summary. So what's an ILO you could write for her? And then the last one is Roberto, a 2nd grader who read 3 level L nonfiction texts with self-correct ratios of 1 out of 15, 1 out of 22, and 1 out of didn't correct any at all, 1 out of none. So very high rates of self-correction. You're going to teach him a strategy for self-correcting, and then what would your expectation be after a few lessons of that for Roberto? So be realistic. Even though we're striving for students to correct every one out of every 2 words that they miss, that's fluent readers are doing that. What can you expect for Roberto after a few lessons on it? Certainly not 1 out of 2, but maybe something lower than what you see here. Okay, so just do the ILOs 1, 2, and 3. You're going to return and finish this later. I also created a possible answer key here, but I want you to try writing the ILOs on your own first based on how I talked in the previous slides, and then check against the answers and know that the answer key is only one set of possible ways that you could write ILOs. There are multiple ways that each one could be approached. Okay, so do your best on this, and I will try to check in on everybody's by the end of Module 3. Okay, if there are any questions about writing ILOs or intervention instruction, please just reach out and you can use the question forum that's on our Moodle course page.